Blog Talk Radio.
Greetings, and welcome to Quantum Healing with Candace. I'm your host, Candace Craw-Goldman. This program was created to assist humans in this rapidly changing world. And while it is expanding into new realms, it is based on the foundation of the late, great Dolores Cannon's work. So thank you, Dolores, for continuing to encourage us to explore new directions. Also, thanks to Greg Prescott and Michelle Walling at N5D.com for making this show possible. And tonight I'd like to take a moment to thank all of the supporters of this show, all of my N5D friends, my New Earth Journey friends, my Facebook friends, UHHT practitioners, and clients. And tonight I'd like to send out a special thank you to two Kansas clients who really mean the world to me, Karen and Martha. Hearing from you both and having you share with me your discoveries and especially the miraculous physical healing has been so gratifying, so priceless. I'm sure Dolores is also pleased. Thank you so much for continuing to support this work. With humanity's new understanding and acceptance of the quantum world and the role that consciousness plays in shaping both our individual and our collective reality, we have plenty of subject material for this show. I'm a full-time practitioner of Dolores' hypnosis method and had the honor and privilege of working with and alongside of her for several years. And you can find out more about my practice of quantum healing and my consulting and coaching services at newearthjourney.com. I'd like to mention I'm offering my own new quantum healing service that's available remotely. Call or email me about how we can create your very own unique quantum healing process. And lastly, before we get started tonight, for those of you looking for a practitioner of Dolores' method of quantum healing, or for those who have trained with Dolores in the past, you may find wonderful practitioners and resources of all kinds at Dolores Cannon, QHHT.com. That's Dolores Cannon, QHHT.com. And make sure you check out our new published authors book page there. We have many practitioners who are published authors, and we're featuring their books. And also, if you'd like to participate live on the show tonight, please call this number, 646-716-8890. That's 646-716-8890. And there's also the chat room available. Tonight is February 12th, 2016, and I'm doing this show from Austin, Texas, where there's a little bit of cedar in the air. So forgive me for throat clearing that I may do tonight because of that. And so now I'd like to tell you just a little bit about tonight's guest, UHHT practitioner Carole Neary. Carole's a long-time QHHT practitioner, and I'm really excited to spend some time chatting with her tonight. She's a healer and a homeopath, and she's trained and certified as a hypnotherapist, of course, a QHHT practitioner. She's also a homeopath and Hypnotherapist, and we have to find out what that's all about. She's a Reconnective healer, a light therapist. She's a medium and an Akashic record reader and healer. So I am very pleased to welcome to the show tonight Carole Neary. Welcome, Carole. Hold on, let me unmute your microphone. There you go.
Thank you,
Welcome,
Candace.
Carole. I didn't punch that button fast enough. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well. And you?
I am doing just really fine. I've had a marvelous visit down here in Austin visiting my son, and we just had some amazing Mexican food, and we blew in just in time to get the radio started, the radio show started, and talk with you tonight, so I'm doing great. So welcome again to the show. You have some wonderful stories, and I know that one of the reasons that we talked about having a show is, well, a couple things. You have a special emphasis on ADC, After Death Communication, and homeopathy as it relates to QHHT sessions. And so why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get into this work? How did you find out about Dolores?
Oh, my gosh. Well, I can't even remember how I became aware of Dolores, but all my life, ever since I was a very young child, as long as I can remember, I just knew that my job here was to be a healer in some capacity. And actually, as a child, I knew that I had the ability to heal with light coming from my hands. I knew this was going to be a part of my life. And I used to practice on dead insects and animals and all kinds of things as I was growing up, whatever I could get my hands on. And my family thought it was very strange. But I think it was quite a while ago, back in the 90s, I went to have a regression done with a wonderful channel and teacher down here in Southern California, Sean Randall. And after the regression, which was amazing, I was told by her, Carole, I see a lot of healing spirits around you, and they say that they're here to teach you how to become a healer. That is your life's work. And I said, well, I'm thrilled. I'm ecstatic, but I don't know the first thing about that. I don't know anybody who does that. I don't have a clue how to do it. So she told me that a spirit would be coming forward to help me. And I was skeptical because I've been told things like that before. You know, your spirit guide's going to contact you, and nothing, nada. So I left her office feeling very satisfied with the regression, which answered all kinds of questions about things that were going on in my life as a new mother. And I got into my car, and I started heading for the freeway. I drove maybe 4 city blocks when I heard somebody in the back seat of my car. And the amazing thing to me is that I wasn't freaking out. I think I was still in kind of a trance state. And so I just thought to myself, oh, hey, I hear somebody in the back seat of my car. And then suddenly, where the driver's window is, which was rolled up, I heard this huge voice, a booming voice. It wasn't a whisper by any means. A very, very loud voice said, "My name is Enoch." And I just took it very matter of fact, and I said, "Oh, are you that spirit guide that is supposed to teach me how to become a healer?" And he said yes, and we had a brief conversation about that. And then I heard him kind of tune out. And that was it. So I was driving home on the freeway. It took me about an hour to get home. And the whole way I was trying to figure out why that name sounded familiar to me. And I decided it sounded like a biblical name. And half of my family is Jewish. So I thought, well, maybe it's a Jewish name. So I got home and came into my office, and I have built-in bookshelves that go up to the ceiling. And I'm very short. If you haven't met me, I'm 5'2" at most. So I grabbed a yardstick, and there was a Bible on the very top shelf. And I started coaxing it off with the yardstick and thinking that I would catch it on its way down. But I missed, and it fell open to a page. And that page, the Bible mentioned Enoch and explained, who he was. So then I was a little bit freaked out, Candace. So that, I actually, from that point on, I thought, well, okay, I'm going to take some classes. I'm going to learn how to communicate with this Enoch fellow. And I took channeling classes and mediumship classes and other things. I thought I was going to be channeling him, and that didn't happen. But he communicated with me in other ways, just like telepathically. And so as I studied these other methods, he came into my life a little bit more. Well, one day I got an email from somebody who I knew very peripherally saying, Carole, my sister is doing these webinars. Why don't you tune in? There's one coming up, Friday, whatever the date was. I think you'll be interested in it. So I did. I tuned into it. I actually didn't plan to. I wasn't supposed to be home that day. But I was on my computer, I was at home, and a reminder popped up about it. And the curious thing is, this was somebody who was way from my past. I had worked with her many years before. I had never talked to her about anything like this. So I was doing just clerical kind of work, and so I turned on the webinar. And I was listening, and the guest was Eric Pearl. And Eric was talking about how he had been a chiropractor in West Hollywood, and he suddenly started having a weird effect on his patients. They reported that they could feel him working on them when he was doing nothing. And so that really piqued my interest, and he talked about it was light coming from his hands. And then what really did it for me was he said that everything he was talking about could be found in a book called The Keys of Enoch, which I had seen in a bookstore and tried to read, and it seemed very difficult, so I put it back. So
Wow, what a great story. I just love that introduction story. How amazing. May I ask a couple questions before you continue?
Sure, of course.
I have to go back to you being a little kid and with the light coming out of your hands and the insects and everything. First off, I have a question. Could you see the light? I mean, physical light, or was it in your mind's eye kind of light?
It was in my mind's eye, and I didn't have, until much later, I didn't have a clue what had put that there. But I was convinced. I believed that it was there. And I also believed that if I believed in it, it would happen.
Just a truly wonderful story about childhood and magic. I love that. And the second thing then is, so the conversation in the car, the voice that you heard, are you saying that's the only time you heard the voice since then?
Like that, yes.
The one and Wow.
That was the only time I heard it so loud and clear. It was many years ago, and since then, I can communicate with spirit guides. I hear them talking to me when I go into what I now know is a light trance state. So as we tell our hypnosis clients when they come in, that as soon as you close your eyes, you go into an alpha state, which is a very light hypnotic trance. Or if you're watching television, within a minute, there you are. Or driving. Personally, driving is one of my favorite ways to relax and let the messages come through. So, yeah.
Very good. Well, so then you just started learning some of these methods, and so when did the mediumship come in too? I'd like to just keep telling us stories, Carole. You're such a great storyteller. I'll sit back and let you talk.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Well, I started learning about healing and mediumship when I was quite young. I now know that other people in my family were mediums. I did not know that then. So I read so much. I was an avid reader. It was before we had video games, and my family really restricted our television viewing. So I spent a lot of time at the library investigating. Whenever I had a question, my dad would say, "Go look it up." He bought an encyclopedia for us to look up, and we lived down the street from the library, so we could walk down to the library and look up the answers to almost anything. Hold on, I need to take a sip here.
Sure, and I totally understand that. And so you're a library lover, just like many of us, and Dolores herself.
Oh, really? That is very cool. I didn't know that about Dolores. But as I did get to know her, I found that she and I had quite a few things in common. So there's another one.
Well, yes, absolutely. She talks about, being at the Library of Alexandria when it was sacked and burned, and how she was grabbing as many scrolls as she could to try to save from the fire. It's a moving story. I think it must be on a video somewhere. Maybe somebody in the chat room or somebody on the forum could tell us about that. But so you go down to the library and you did all of this research as a child. So this has been your entire life.
Oh, yes. It has been, literally. So
amazing.
So I started reading, and I set the intention that I wanted to have these things in my life. I wanted to have mediumship. I wanted to be a healer. I wanted to feel like I was doing something that really helped people. That was a very strong motivation for me. And, oh, by the way, I also was a librarian, and I'll talk about that a little bit.
I didn't know that.
That'll
now,
come
that's
in
a
later.
Surprise.
Yeah,
Gosh,
yeah.
no.
I don't think many people would ever look at me as somebody who would be a librarian. I'm very busy, and I don't really fit that type. However, I was. So I took a lot of classes. I took mediumship and Akashic studies, I guess you would call it. I have some sort of a certificate with that. But for me, one of my greatest loves is hypnosis. And I learned about hypnosis when I was in 5th grade. My father was a dentist. And dentists, like other medical professionals, have to take CEU, continuing education units. And so we had a library that had quite a few books in it. And one day, some new books appeared in there, which I knew because I would be scanning the shelves all the time. And it was a collection of books about hypnosis that my father had from CEU courses he had taken. And he actually used hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming in his practice. So he was a really good dentist. I'm telling you, his patients loved him. And that was because he used this programming to help his patients so that they would relax. And he retired fairly early. I think it was maybe a few days after my youngest sister finished college because he was so ready to be out of there. And the reason was he had gone into dentistry with an open heart, wanting to help people. And the way he put it is, people come to see me and I always see them in their worst light because they're afraid. So the hypnosis worked very well for him in his practice. And he was subtle with his suggestions. People never even knew. But I learned that. I worked for him during the school year. I worked for him one day a week in his practice, and during the summers, I was not overjoyed, but I worked there every single day. And so I was able to put a lot of money away, which I later used to pay for college. And in junior high and high school, I used it because I got very involved with horses. So that took a lot of money. So it was a good thing that my dad had this fairly lucrative job for me in his practice. But I was always curious about hypnosis because one of the very first books I read was, I believe it was called The Search for Bridie Murphy. Have you heard of that, Candace?
Oh, I absolutely have, and that's another book that Dolores will reference when she talks about her own history. When she started writing, there was only, that book plus maybe, I don't know, another one at the time. So that's just one of the very first books ever written in this genre.
Yes, it was. And so Dolores and I both were very intrigued by that book, but she was a little bit older than I. I was in fifth grade. And so I just devoured that book, and it opened up this world to me of hypnotic regression. And
Carole, how come I couldn't have read it when I was in fifth grade? How amazing is that for you? I mean, your whole life has been primed for this. What a great story, and how magical this has all been for you.
It really, really has. And the way I came into QHHT was as magical as QHHT is, because I had gone, I have a very dear friend who channels Dr. Peebles. If any of you have heard of Dr. Peebles, Athena Dimitrios, she's wonderful. And so I was with her one day, and she was doing a reading for me. Dr. Peebles was emphatic that I have a relationship with ETs, and that it is part of my mission to write books about ETs so that people will not be afraid of them. And he stressed on me, this is really important. You have to get on this. You're running out of time. So I thought, well, running out of time, what's he talking about? So I thought, well, I don't know anything about ETs. I read a lot of, ghost stories and stuff when I was a kid, and I was always fascinated by them, which my father was too. And I certainly did not have enough knowledge to write a book about it. So I contacted Barbara Lamb, who is a regressionist here in Southern California, who's known for working with the people who call themselves abductees or experiencers. And I called her, we went out to lunch and kind of tossed around ideas about getting together to write a book, but I felt like that just wasn't the right thing. I felt that I was supposed to gain some experience and write about my experience. And somewhere here, I came across Dolores. I really, honestly, I don't know why I can't remember what it was because I have very good memory. But I did learn about her, and I wrote to her several times asking her if she would come to Los Angeles and teach. And she did. She set up a class in Los Angeles, and there were 77 of us, I think, in the class, and I got to study with her, and it was amazing. It was just amazing.
What year was that, Carole?
I think it was
approximately
5 years ago.
So,
about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the first, I believe it was the first time they did a class that was a week long because they added on extra days so that we could do practice sessions there, and she could be there to help us, which was fantastic. And so it was a dream come true for me. And
I remember when I took her, I was just going to say, when we took her class, it was 3 days, and we asked her outright. We said, Dolores, how come we don't have practice days? She said, oh, because nobody wants those. No one will stay extra days to do that.
Really? She was very humble that way. That was, I think, very humble. Yes, well, we needed it, and I think it was good that she did that because to me, if you just learn it, unless you already have a practice of some sort going, how are you going to have the courage to really get started? And in fact, after we had our class, I invited everybody from the class who was interested to get together for practice days. And so we did have some practice days. Oh, and this is very interesting, Candace. I think you'll appreciate this. We had a practice session here at my home. There were, I think, six of us. And so we split up into groups and we did sessions. And then we came back and we talked afterward. So the person who was in the downstairs bedroom directly below the bedroom that I was in, we were both being regressed. We had the exact same regression.
I love that story. Can you give us a quick summary? What was the experience that you had?
Oh my gosh. I don't even remember, except I remember one part where we were each flying through a tunnel that was very unique. And so we were describing this when we all got together as a group afterward and we were talking. And then what transpired after that was the same thing. And it was also, he was the person who was sitting next to me through the whole week of class. And he was in my practice group. And, you know, during the classes, Dolores always said, you are all here together at this time for a reason. And so I believe her. I don't believe in coincidences after doing this work. I really do not. But, you know, before I forget, there was something else interesting that happened then, too. There was a girl who came, two girls who came, and they were working together as a team for a while after we were trained. And they were both certified clinical hypnotherapists. And so they were in school. They weren't certified yet. And so they were practicing on classmates. And they found that somebody in their class had also had a connection to Enoch. And then one of these girls, she and And I had a link with another past life that we both had seen through regression. And then she set up a meetup group, and I was going to a lot of her meetup groups, and we were doing hypnosis on people, and she would frequently use me as the person who she hypnotized, because I had gotten pretty good at being that hypnotic subject by that point. There was a girl who was going regularly who, once we started this meetup group, was driving in her car, and guess who showed up in her car?
Yeah, Enoch.
Yes, exactly the same way as me.
And the same way?
Mm-hmm. And so she started studying something called Enochian astrology. Astrology is one of the few things I haven't gotten into, so I really don't know anything about it. But I thought that was so amazing that by going to Dolores' class, I ended up with quite a large circle, a support network or a network of people who had connections to me through these odd channels. And I really believe that we travel with like our soul family or soul group through life, creating these experiences in our lives. And things like this that happen just show that to me over and over and over again.
And tell us a little bit more about your mediumship experience. And I know you had a sister that passed, and can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yes, I can. That was a very interesting experience because this was a sister who I was not on good terms with. She lived nearby, so I saw her. I would have her over to my house. But some things had transpired in our lives where I felt very betrayed by her and treated very badly. And she had a pretty severe personality disorder, like a borderline personality disorder. And so she made me a target, and nobody else in my family. And it was excruciatingly painful. And I really resented it because I was working very hard at one point, for instance, to get into medical school. And my dad had promised to help me. And I was working as a librarian at a UC campus. It was a prestigious job in the library world, but it was not for me. And the campus agreed to let me go to half-time employment so I could finish up my pre-med work. But I found that I just was not making enough money to live on, and I also got to a point where I couldn't continue. I didn't have enough time to take all the classes, the lab courses that I needed to finish in order to apply to medical school. My dad was going to help me financially, and then my sister told some lies about me, and I was kicked out of my family and ostracized. And it's still painful, but I had this experience. Then many years later, not too long ago, she passed in her sleep, and it was kind of a shock. She wasn't that old. She was 50 years old. And I felt some relief, which I felt guilty about, but I did feel relieved because she was very disruptive in our lives in many ways. And I also felt angry that she had never apologized to me for this treatment. And so 3 days after she passed, I was struggling with this anger. It had really risen up, and I was struggling with it. And I was lying in bed, and I started meditating for guidance on this. And suddenly I became aware of this, I would describe it as a light being in my bedroom. It was like a person in, it was like I was seeing two things. So I was seeing a person, a beautiful, beautiful woman who was golden and beautiful, but it was also like a column of golden light. I instantly recognized her as my sister, although she looked nothing like my sister. And also, simultaneously, as she appeared, I felt this tremendous, just unconditional love. It was overwhelming. I just burst into tears. And in an instant, she communicated so many things to me. I understood every nuance of everything that had occurred in the life that I shared with my sister. And one thing I do recall very clearly that she said to me was, and I believe this was my sister's higher self. She said, she showed me a picture of my sister, and she said, don't feel guilty, referring to my feelings about having felt relief and some actual happiness. I'm embarrassed to say that she was out of my life for good. And she said, don't feel guilty. I wasn't proud of who I was and what I had to do in that lifetime. But now you understand. And that was like that. Like she snapped her finger, and suddenly I knew everything. I knew everything. I knew why she was born, why she was my sister, why she had passed, when, where, how she had passed, everything. And it brought me so much peace and happiness. And I had for quite a while been very angry. I had this inner rage about all of these things that had happened between the two of us, and it was instantly gone. It was just gone. It vanished.
That's quite an amazing story. And so
it changed my life completely.
You being a medium, you can help others have this kind of peace by understanding relationships, etc., too, right? And of course, we do something like that in QHHT sessions. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, I feel like in QHHT, we're often tapping into the same energies, depending on the client who comes to us and what they are asking to see and what is most appropriate for them. At that moment, I was in a deep, very deep trance state, and that was something that I needed to see and experience. Just like our clients, that we assure them that when they come to us, we will be working with their higher self, and that their higher self cares for them and is with them and will prevent them from being overwhelmed or being traumatized by anything they see, that the higher self will only show them what is most appropriate for them at this particular time. And that is what they did for me at that moment. And so when I work with clients, I often, I don't know about you, but I imagine you also have people who come to you, they've heard of Dolores' work, and they're in grief. They're in deep mourning because of somebody close to them passing, and they want to understand it. In fact, one of my very first clients who I took after the class, and everybody always says, don't they, that their first case was just the most memorable? Well, this was one that was very special. It was a man, he was not very old. His wife, who was much younger than him, I don't know how old he was, maybe 40. And he'd been very successful, and he had a wonderful, wonderful relationship with his wife, a beautiful marriage. They just were so in love. And one day, she just dropped dead. There was no warning at all. she had a sudden cardiac arrest. And I think it had been a few months, and he was still in deep grief. And he said that the reason he had come was because he needed some answers. He needed some sort of an answer about why that happened. And Candace, he had the most beautiful regression. He was shown 3 lives with the woman who he married and loved for too few years, unfortunately, but he saw her in every lifetime. They were together, and it was always that she was affiliated with him in some way that was not at an equal level, not quite at an equal level. And what I mean by that is that he would always end up leaving her in each life. He ended up leaving her. Once was by death, but the other 2 times, his role that he was playing in society took him away from her. And he thought that was okay. And so when we asked his subconscious, or I always call it the higher self, that just seems to me a little more grand, and it is such a grand energy. Why not call it that? Mm-hmm. So when we asked his higher self why she had passed, why she had left, they said because it was her turn to go first. Mm-hmm. And that was so profound for him. For him, that just released all of the grief, and he felt able to move forward.
That's really such a beautiful story, such an incredible, beautiful gift.
And after that, I was hooked on this because he was so grateful. It changed his life, just like that experience I had with my sister's higher self was life-changing for me as well. But just seeing that I could help somebody in that way, that was tremendous. That was the best gift ever.
And so I have to ask you this: being a medium, doing the QHHT work, you got any information about Dolores for us? What's your sense about Dolores and what's she doing now and what she'd like us to know?
Oh, Dolores is accomplishing amazing things. She can accomplish much more on that side now than she could have if she had continued here. And that was why she left when she did. But I don't make a practice of trying to bring her into the session. I always ask her to help me, and I feel her there, but it's not like I'm trying to ask questions about her. However, I have had some dreams with Dolores, which surprised me because, frankly, when I took level 1, I was kind of intimidated by her. I looked up to her so much that I felt kind of shy, very shy, actually. And we talked a little bit because she had talked to everybody at length in the session, and she said that the SC was always telling her, from many, many regressions that she did for other people, they were always telling her, don't take pharmaceutical or over-the-counter drugs, only use homeopathy. And I was just flabbergasted because, that's my belief. But for her to feel that way too, I thought, wow, that's really pretty cool. So anyway, I was shocked. I didn't, when Dolores passed, I found out about it that day, And the day before that, the night before that, was when I had a dream about her. I went to bed, and my husband and I we were involved in a project. We still are. I call it the health coach, which is a play on words, because I'm not talking about health coaching. I'm talking about a coach, a motorhome. And so we purchased a motorhome, but at that time we were in the process of purchasing or considering purchasing a motorhome, and I really, really wanted to do this and to travel around the country. When my husband retires, travel around the country talking to patient support groups and people in general, and talking to them about alternative medical care and how many alternatives there are. And specifically, I want to talk to them about QHHT and some of the other modalities I do, especially reconnective healing and homeopathy. But, very few people in this country have access to alternative health care, really good quality alternative health care, because the insurance companies rarely pay for it. There are a few who do. And we're bombarded constantly by advertisements. I saw an ad on TV the other day about a drug that they made the drug into like a little dog that followed this woman around like it was her best friend. And these drugs can be very, very harmful for us. I have to confess, I left my librarian job to go to work for a medical company, and I had an almost 30-year career working in pharmaceuticals, and I do know that they are very harmful, believe me. So I was going to bed, and I was asking for some guidance about the health coach project, and I had a wonderful dream, and it was with Dolores, and she told me, I am going to help you. Don't worry. I will always be here with you, helping you. She was so loving and amazing, and I felt like, wow, I had that whole week with her, and I was so scared of her. What was I thinking? I was crazy. So I know she's here. I know she's here helping us. And I do not believe that dreams are fiction. I think that we travel in our dreams, and we meet with our guides, or whatever you want to call them, our soul families. And when we do, we can get some amazing insights.
I love that story about the dream and just about all of it. And for those of our listeners who aren't practitioners and who haven't had a session, it just seems that Dolores shows up in sessions. Carole was Wheaton, and I'm the same way. We don't just do these sessions and then put some sort of request or call in for her to show up. But she quite frankly just shows up very often, and then hands or imparts information to us. But I know that she had some very specific ideas about medications and homeopathy. When I would see her at breakfast sometimes in class, and she would have a vitamin pill or something, and people would notice that she had that, by her orange juice or by her tea, and she would always tell everyone, these aren't drugs, this is a vitamin pill, and this is, a supplement or whatever, because she was very adamant about the pharmaceuticals. And would you tell us, Carole, a little bit more about how you discovered homeopathy and how you find that it supports your QHHT practice, and maybe, some overreaching theories about it, homeopathy, for those of our listeners who don't know much about it and who certainly might not know much about its efficacy.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, so first, how did I find out about homeopathy? Well, I told you that I used to be a librarian. I was a librarian at UCLA, which has one of the most amazing library systems anywhere in the world. And they have a huge biomedical library, which is part of a network of medical libraries, and UCLA's library is one of the larger ones. And so while I was working there, I started to have these strange food reactions that at that time you were either allergic to something or it was all in your head. And I knew it was not all in my head, and people who lived with me could tell you I developed this thing where there were certain foods, if I ate them, I just instantly went into a rage attack. And I thought I was going insane. I was trying to figure out what was going on. So I spent a lot of time in the biomedical library researching food sensitivities, things like that. And in my search, I was getting just huge numbers of citations to journals that were homeopathic medical association journals. And so I started reading them. And a lot of them were in German and other languages, but there were a fair amount that were in English and were American journals from the 1800s, early 1900s. And so I learned that homeopathy is, well, it was not very well understood. There are lots and lots of documented cases of it being efficacious and even curative for conditions that are considered to be incurable. And I just was fascinated reading it and began to make plans to go to Europe so that I could go to a homeopathic medical school. I knew, there had to be some way that I'd be able to do it. But I met my husband and I postponed those plans. So in the meantime, I started studying it here. Now, what is homeopathy? Homeopathy is a medical system that is based on energy medicines, but they're in pill form. And that's a really weird concept, a pill that is energy. So what it is now, and this is something I learned about working for a pharmaceutical company that had a cancer division. I worked in a cancer division with one company, and we were developing nanotechnology medications to treat cancer. Well, guess what? Homeopathy is nanotechnology. I'm so grateful to be practicing homeopathy at this time because we actually have had a number of scientific studies, even by a Nobel Prize winner, that show that it's not a placebo. There's actually, if you drop the pill in a little bit of water, which is how it is, if you're listening, the correct way to take a homeopathic medicine is not just the dry pill, but you put it in a little bit of water and let it dissolve. And scientists who have at Stanford and Penn State, Caltech, a number of big research centers have done that and measured, for instance, the energy potentials in each solution. They find that there is a difference between different potencies of a particular homeopathic remedy, and that different homeopathic remedies like Nux vomica, pulsatilla, chamomilla, whatever, register different profiles too. And certain scientists have found that these nanoparticles that are in the solution, the resulting solution, that are different from ones from other homeopathic remedies. So we know that there is energy there and that it's distinctly different when you go from one remedy or potency to another. So that I'm grateful for the people who are doing this thankless work, because they're getting very little recognition from it. But it's so important for us now. And in fact, the pharmaceutical industry views homeopathy as a threat, and in many countries they have actively fought homeopathy. In Europe right now, Europe and Great Britain, they have hired public relations companies that call themselves, they pose as skeptics and disseminate information that makes people feel like they're stupid for using homeopathy. And if you want to work for a pharmaceutical company in Europe, I understand from some people who used to be pharmaceutical reps who became homeopaths that you have to sign a contract that you will not use or discuss homeopathy while you're employed by them.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it's big.
That's just, oh my gosh.
It's big. Here in the U.S., back in the, I'd have to check my notes from school, but you know Andrew Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie is? Well, he was very wealthy and charitable. He educated himself at the public library, but he decided that he wanted to help other people to be educated in schools. And so he had a special foundation that was responsible for the bulk of the funding of medical schools back in late 1800s, early 1900s. And but, you know, he was a very busy man, so of course he delegated authority. And the man who, I can't remember his name, but if anybody's interested, I can look it up and post it on Facebook or something. The man who was in charge of the grants to medical schools was approached by pharmaceutical companies who encouraged him to change the criteria for how the awards were given. At this time, there were many homeopathic medical schools in the United States, and it was a part of the curriculum at almost all medical schools. So they changed the criteria for the funding to say that schools that taught homeopathy could not receive funding from the Carnegie Foundation. And so a number of schools stopped offering those courses, or they just closed. And so doctors today, except at a few schools like UC Irvine, UC San Diego, I know, they get absolutely no information about homeopathy in their program. At those schools, UC Irvine, UC San Diego, and there are a few others, they have now what they're calling integrative medicine programs, where they learn a little bit about acupuncture or homeopathy or Reiki, but not enough to really practice it. So that's an opportunity for all of us who are alternative practitioners to go and help. As far as homeopathy and what it does, well, it's, if you can imagine taking a magic pill that makes your illness go away without side effects, that's how it works. I don't want to call it magic because it does have a scientific basis. But it works without causing harm. It's as if it's energy that goes in and it cancels out the symptoms that you're displaying and can cause healing and regeneration of tissue to occur. So it is based, for instance, when I prescribe homeopathic medicine, I use the law of similars, and that means like cures like. So, for instance, think of chopping up onions in your kitchen. You get a really spicy one, and your eyes are burning, and your nose starts running really clear, watery, stringy kind of mucus, and you may have some burning sensations. Well, if you took a homeopathic medicine that was made from onion called Allium cepa, most of our medicines go by a Latin name, it would work on those symptoms. And this is a property of the nanoparticles, and this is why the pharmaceutical companies want to use them for cancer treatment and such. Homeopathy, by the way, is effective for cancer treatment. When you hear, and I'm going to make a statement that some listeners may disagree with, but when you hear that there's no cure for cancer, that is not true. As QHHT practitioners, we know that there are many different effective cures for cancer. We just don't, most people just don't have a clue. They don't know, because all they know is what is allowed to be published and what is allowed to be put on television. Not all of these things are allowed to be taught, because in the United States, for cancer, for instance, a physician has to treat cancer with chemotherapy and or radiation and or surgery, and they are not allowed to talk to patients. This is an MD, a medical doctor. They're not allowed to talk to patients about alternative methods. So in some cases, they will take a business card from somebody like me or you, and they'll post it somewhere in a waiting room, but they can't give it to the patient. Our medical system here is very political. The pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies, etc., are very, very wealthy. They are one of the greatest contributors to our economy outside of the oil industry. And so, you know, all of those medical journals, if a doctor says, well, there's no proof that homeopathy works, well, it's because the medical journals are funded by pharmaceutical companies, and they won't allow this information to be printed. However, the British journal Lancet, which is a very good journal, has published a number of studies demonstrating the efficacy of homeopathy, statistically significantly more efficacious than pharmaceuticals, especially when it comes to these studies which were treating different epidemics. So, and in Cuba, Cuba has not had access to most pharmaceuticals, including vaccination. So they have used homeopathic vaccinations. It's a branch of homeopathy. Sorry, I have a call coming in. It's called Homeotherapeutics. It's escaping me right now because I'm a little distracted by that buzzing that's going on. So in my practice, your question was, how do I use homeopathy with QHHT? And I do not often use them in that way, because QHHT usually is effective for whatever the person wants. It clears it, and I've had so many cases where QHHT resolved whatever the issue was. I even did a blog talk radio show. I was interviewed on a blog talk radio show. It wasn't my show, talking about spontaneous healings that I had facilitated through QHHT. I did have one client who came in, and he was a very interesting person, a medical professional, and he came to me because he had he was very proud of his physique, and he was an older man, but had obviously put so much effort into his appearance. He did tanning. I don't know if it was spray on or what. I'm not, an authority on that. But he was tan, I'm telling you. He had, he's perfectly coiffed, and he was a pretty good-looking guy, I have to say. He's probably 10 years older than me, but he looked great, except he had this big belly, like a big beer gut. And he said that he even invited me to poke it. It wasn't fat, and it was hard as a rock. I mean, it wasn't like a tympanic belly or anything that felt like it was full of gas. It was just big. And so he wanted to get rid of that. That was his main complaint and main reason for doing the homeopathy. So we talked for quite a while before the session, which is my habit, and I imagine for most people. And we were talking about his life and everything, and he mentioned that one of his siblings was deceased, a sister, but that was about it. So, we went in to do the session, and as soon as we got him into a very relaxed state, let's see, he went on the cloud. And when he went on the cloud, he burst into tears, hysterical sobbing. And I couldn't get him settled down. He just started talking. He was in absolute hysterics and tears flying all over the place. And he was talking about his sister. His sister had passed away 19 years before, and he was still heartbroken, and it was affecting him every day of his life. He hadn't shared that with me before. So eventually we just started talking. He sat up in bed, and he wanted to talk about the sister, so we pretty much abandoned doing QHHT, but I listened to him, and then I put it together with some other things he had told me. One thing was he was very late for his appointment, and it was because he had gotten in an altercation with somebody when he was getting off of the freeway. He had a really hot temper. He was a very passionate guy. And what was the other thing? He had this swollen belly. He had this deep grief. And there was one other thing, but just those three things alone were enough for me to know that Ignatia in homeopathic form would probably be helpful for him. So he had seen a homeopath before, but had not gotten relief. And so I said, would you like to try it again? I'd like to give you a remedy right now if you are willing. And he said yes. So I gave him a remedy, the Ignatia. And before he left, he said he felt better. He became very calm. He stopped crying. He said his stomach felt better. And then he emailed me that night, and he said that by the time he got home, probably an hour from here, his belly had really deflated quite a bit. And then, when I talked to him, it was an email. 3 weeks later, one of the issues in his life was he had a romantic interest, a partner who he had been living with for 8 or 9 years, and he couldn't commit to this person. He couldn't commit to marrying them, and he talked about how this person was just, always irritating him, and being very irritable is part of the Ignatia picture. Well, 3 weeks later, they got married, and he told me he was so happy. He was so grateful, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, he had a beautiful physique, perfect body, and everything. No more beer belly or whatever it was. It was resolved very easily. So that is the best example of me actually using homeopathy and QHHT together. Often when I'm doing QHHT, my guides are talking to me, or have you ever had this happen where it's like your higher self links with that person's higher self, and you see
absolutely.
what they are seeing? And yeah,
absolutely. And sometimes I'll take notes. I'll be in a session, and I remember, I think almost the very first time this ever happened, because this person was talking about how they were on this donkey and they were coming down this hill, and then they met this person in a dress, and suddenly I'm seeing kind of like all of this, and then they come down, and then they turn off the path, and so I'm writing these notes, and I'm like, that is a strikingly turquoise dress, that's floor length. That, they didn't really say anything about the dress. They were just saying, this person in the dress, and then they were on with their story. And then which way they turned and the size of the donkey. And I'm writing this down, what I'm thinking. And when it was all over and we're doing the debrief, these were details that just kind of didn't come out, because not all details, of course, do come out, just some as they're telling the story. And when I went down the list and I said, was it this, was it this, was it this, and it was all of that, I mean, I was stunned. It was the first time I realized that actually could really happen. And it does not happen to me in every one of my sessions. And I don't know why.
No, not in everyone.
Well, why is that, do you think? Why does it happen with some people? Is it a vibration connection between the two, or why is it that sometimes that it really does happen and it's so clear, or there's a lot of a connection in that way, and sometimes that there isn't? What do you think's going on there, Carole?
Well, I don't think it could be that you have some sort of a past life connection with the person. Was that what you were saying? I mean, that's certainly possible, but I think it's that your higher self and theirs are communicating. And, Candace, you little medium, you've got a lot of intuitive ability going on, and I think it has to do with that. And you know what? Can I say, I recently did level 2 training, and so I was in with a group that were mostly people who'd been practicing for a couple of years, and I asked if other people had that happening too. Quite a few people had similar experiences, so it's not unique to me. I mean, I'm special in some ways, but come on, I'm actually a very humble person. I think it's just that resonance, that energy, maybe that space. In some schools of thought, they talk about creating a space for this energy and sharing the space. I don't know what it is, but it's really fun.
It is fun. It is fun, but it's a mystery to me why some sessions, the connection or the knowledge that comes so freely from whatever realms that there are, it's just different, client to client. There's to me some pretty big swings. Sometimes I don't see anything of what the other client is seeing, and I mean nothing. Or not much.
Well, maybe.
And I'm just, and so other times a whole lot of information comes through.
Yeah, do you think that those clients where you see a lot of it, that they're in a deeper state than other clients? Can you find any pattern at all?
That's a really good question, and I don't know if I have the answer. There are times when I've wished that I had like an actual Star Trek or some other sort of device, some sort of meter that can actually measure brainwaves. And I know that we have things like, we have signs that we look for and different things like that. And I completely understand that. And all of that's fine. And just like you said, there are some amazing kinds of information that can come through in the very lightest of trances even as you say, driving. So the depths of trance, as far as being valuable, any one of those states can bring some valuable information and or healing. But I don't know. I've tried to figure and puzzle that out a little bit. Sometimes I wonder what it is. The barriers. If the barriers to the information are put up by one, by the other, by both of us together. I guess if and when we can really see more patterns of energy and really, understand things in a broader way, maybe, in a higher perspective way, we'll be able to answer some of these questions. But you're right. It's almost fun to kind of guess right now, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. But I just know, if I do a QHHT session and get somebody into a good place and they feel like they got something out of it, there's nothing I do that really makes me as happy as that. So I could see myself just doing QHHT in my practice. It's just so delightful, and people they feel so appreciative. Not everybody. I mean, I had a client who she was barely in a trance, just for a minute maybe. She took herself out because there were some issues that she did not want to deal with, and I think she did not trust that they would not come up. She actually forbade me to ask any questions about them in the session, and of course I did what she wanted, but I knew that had to come up for her to get some kind of healing. Anyway, she when she left, she wasn't a very happy person. I felt kind of depressed after that because people come with such high expectations. Some people are just expecting or wanting so much to happen that it can interfere with their experience, and I feel very bad for them if that happens. But this lady, I don't think that was the case with her. I think she kind of was trying to fulfill expectations that nothing could help her. However, 3 days later, 3 seems to be the magic number for me. I got an email from her saying that she, for the first time in like 35 years, she had woken up with almost no pain, and that was a huge, huge thing for her. I've had a lot of success with fibromyalgia. Have you had many people with fibromyalgia?
Not so many that I can think of with that, but I've had several cases of people with along those lines, similar lines, rheumatoid arthritis, a couple autoimmune issues like that. Have recently gotten back with me with some just amazing reports of improvements, and very much so. Speaking of QHHT and success stories, I know that you've had several about physical trauma, great physical trauma with. Why don't you share a couple of those stories?
Yeah, okay, so let me think. I do get a lot of people who have physical trauma and emotional trauma. I work with a lot of athletes. I'm a former competitive athlete myself, and I love working with athletes because they're so, in tune with their body. They love their bodies. They want to take good care of them. So I've had, I have to say that the ones who have physical traumas are not usually as interested in QHHT. The athletes, they usually want homeopathy or reconnective healing, both of which work really well. It seems like it's more people with with emotional trauma who turn to hypnosis. At least in my practice, I've seen that. And it's very, very good for that. So I have had, this was interesting. Have you ever had it happen where you get a slew of cases and you're wondering why you get all these cases about that particular same theme, and then
Absolutely.
something happens in your life that's the same thing, or it's about something that's currently going on in your life? It's like you're getting instruction, like help from the other side. So I had an experience where I had 10 to 15 clients who came in, one right after the other, and they all had a history of emotional trauma they were experiencing from sex crimes that were committed against them when they were children. And after the first few, I thought, wow, there must be a lot of people that this has happened to. And I'm sure, in fact, that there are. But then I kept getting more and more. So I just said, okay, guys, what are you trying to show me or prepare me for? Whatever it is, I think I've had enough of this. So because, they would come and they didn't want to do hypnosis, all of them. They didn't want to do hypnosis because they were afraid they would be reliving this experience. So I gave them homeopathy first for the emotional trauma and whatever physical manifestation was occurring of that emotional trauma. And then it opened them up, and about half of them came back then for a QHHT session. Some of the others, they discovered they didn't like that. Sometimes people like the attention they're getting for an illness or, stuff like that. Anyway, and I found that worked really well. Well, so I had all of these victims of sexual crimes, some of them quite violent, and it was a good teaching experience for me because I had to be able to sit there and be okay with them being in pain, as opposed to, trying to make them feel okay or make them feel better, because that really, I don't think, would have been the right thing for them. So what happened was, after I learned to be able to be okay with somebody being in pain, somebody I cared about, somebody who I'm very close to came to me for help with that same thing. And I was so grateful that I had had that experience working with these clients who were people I cared about, but not the same really intimate emotional connection I had with this other person, that then I was able to really be there for them and give them what they needed and to help them through it with a good result. So that's one example of emotional trauma. I had a guy come who was very prominent in his community, and he had been, during his life, abducted, experienced going aboard alien spacecraft and stuff. And he had at one point felt very traumatized by that. But when he came to see me, he said, I'm beyond all that. And but when why are you laughing?
Because I've heard that before.
And?
That, beyond all that. And then there's sometimes, that they're not beyond all that. And I was anticipating you telling something along those lines. Is that where you were going?
Well, there was something else that he had that he was not beyond. But he really was okay with the ET thing and didn't feel he needed to talk about that anymore. His wife, however, was not. She was in the room with him when these creatures would come, and their daughter was repeatedly being taken. And she wanted, for one thing, she wanted some acknowledgement that it impacted her. I guess a lot of stuff had been about him and helping him. But she had reached a point in her life where people who give a lot and give a lot and give a lot often get to where she was saying, hey, I need some help here too. So they came for sessions. One came one day, one came the next day, because they drove hours to come to me. So we just did it that way. And they were wonderful people. I had so much fun getting to know them. Anyway, his thing was he had a temper, and he had this he wasn't ever in the military, but he felt like he was a warrior and ready to spring to action, and he was very hypervigilant. So if anything happened, he was going to get in there and duke it out with whoever it was. He really had a quick temper, apparently. I didn't see that, but from what he described and what his wife described, it was a problem for him. And being so prominent in their community, he had, I don't know if it was an elected office or an appointed office that put him in the forefront. That could have been disastrous for him, Imagine Obama getting into a bar fight. It would be on that level. So we did a QHHT session. And you know how in training they tell you to be prepared? Oh, my gosh, in level 2, you did the video for this where you came off the cloud screaming and screaming. That was him. And I was like, oh, my God, who's going to hear this? Kind of like Dolores' story where she was in a hotel room and that happened. Well, I was in very close quarters with some other people, and he was screaming bloody, bloody murder. And it turned out he was in the Civil War. He was just a kid. Some of these people who were soldiers in that war were 10 years old. Yeah. Maybe younger. I'm not a historian, but he was just a kid. And he was put at as a lookout at a point, which he described it exists. And he was standing there, and he was terrified, just absolutely terrified. And because he was alone, it was dark, and he could hear soldiers coming. And he described what happened after that. And as we do these sessions, if anybody's listening who has never had a session before, sometimes people do experience things that are frightening, and we calm them, we take the fear away, which is an amazing thing to be able to do, and we help them to see it as an observer. And the healing that comes from that is amazing. And for this man, he did have some physical complaints too, but we'd have to check my notes to see what they were. I just remember the temper and the warrior vigilance. He said that completely left him. And his wife wrote me such a nice letter afterward, telling how both of them had really benefited from their experience. And she actually was able to remember some ET encounters that she had too, which she was happy about that. So
that's really such a great story, and I actually love that story on many levels. It's a great story to sort of wrap up our show tonight. But you know what I love about that I mean, you're really right. He was right. You know, the thing about the alien encounters, the off-world beings, you know, he wasn't concerned about that. So the biggest trauma that stretched through lifetimes was, you know, human against human. You know, that's much bigger trauma and violent thing that he carried with him into this life. And isn't that an amazing thing when they can just let that go? Oh,
absolutely.
Just beautiful. Carole, this has been so much fun. You are the most magnificent storyteller. Will you come back and be on the show with me again sometime soon?
Thank you so much. That's such a compliment. I would love to anytime.
We have so many things to talk about. I mean, so many
things
that we
could
can
talk
talk
for
about.
Hours, Candace.
Yes, we really could. And I've gotten to know you so much better as I have so many other practitioners by doing this show, and it's just been so enjoyable. Will you please tell our listeners how they may find you for all of your amazing gifts and services that you offer? How can people out there find you for homeopathy and mediumship and QHHT sessions?
Well, the easiest way to find me is to go to either of the Dolores Cannon websites, whether it's what is the web address for the original
Our main
website?
information website is, and I'll say it again when I close the show, but DoloresCannonQHHT.com. That's DoloresCannonQHHT.com, and we're doing our best to create that to be an even bigger and better information portal, including showcasing authors and YouTube channels and other services and other things that practitioners like yourself offer the public. So yeah, you can go find Carole there, and you practice in California and in Pennsylvania too. Is that right?
I do. Yes, I do. I go back and forth. I'm in Pennsylvania less time than I am here right now because there's just less of a call. But really, when I'm in Pennsylvania, I get people from all over: New Jersey, Ohio, New York. I'm amazed at how far people come for that, and very appreciative, believe me. So I'm there 4 times a year, sometimes more. I've been there as much as 8 times a year. However, that will be increasing. Now, I'm in the Pasadena area in Southern California, and so there should be listings for me in both places. However, you can also go to a website that I'm slowly putting together. It's not complete, and it's one of the worst websites on there because I'm doing it myself, but it's not that bad anyway. It is heartlighthealingcenter.com. heartlighthealingcenter.com, and there's a link if you scroll down on the page that you're on now for this interview, so you can get it right there.
Yep.
So those are probably the 3 best ways to do it. Now, I'm just going to be putting up a Facebook page, Carole Neary Integrative. What is it? Carole Neary Integrative Health and Wellness, and that will be a site that's strictly professional. The Facebook page that I have now is part personal, part professional. So this one will be dedicated mostly to QHHT, but to some other things as well if I feel they're important. Because my practice is fully integrated practice. And on that, we're going to have locations for the health coach. So as we're out and we're traveling and I'm available to speak to groups, do group regressions, talk to patient support groups, see clients, it will be posted on there, so you'll be able to go on. And I'm hoping to have one of those little maps that shows where we are on our journey as we go around. So I'm really excited about that.
Super.
Yeah,
well,
my webpage has my contact information. The DoloresCannon.com has my contact information, and there's another one, QHHTofficial.com, I think it is. It also has my contact information.
Okay. Well, I hope you drive your coach through Kansas and stop by and see us. So thanks again so much for spending the evening with me, Carole. It's been a lot of fun. It's really been great. It was a lot of fun.
Yes. Thank you so much, and thank you, everybody, for listening. And a special shout-out to Pug Mama, who's on, and a few other people. So if anybody has something that they'd like me to address if we do another show, maybe they can put it in the comment section. We didn't actually talk about homeopathy all that much, but I do love to talk about it, so maybe another time.
Oh, that would be great. That would really be great. Well, thank you so much, and good night, Carole. We'll be talking to you soon. And, yes, I want to thank everyone who's tuned in tonight and all of you in the chat room. Next Friday, I'm actually going to be in Florida getting ready to speak at the N5D Superpower Conference. So there's going to be no show on Friday, the 19th of February. So please join us again on February 26th, where we're going to be welcoming QHHT practitioner Suzanne Franzen from Hawaii. And she's going to be talking about her brand new published book called Burning Worlds. And, again, you can find her book and lots of our practitioners' book on the new author section in Dolores Cannon, QHHT.com. And if you are a practitioner of Dolores' method, you can find our robust original support community at DoloresCannonQHHT.com. And you can find me, again, at NewEarthJourney.com. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us this evening. And until next time, sleep well. Many blessings to you all. Thank you. And good night.